What's going on? My name is Matt Parker and today it's my pleasure to be talking about short scale bass guitars. I'm going to give you 5 reasons why every bass player needs to try a short scale bass. But before we start today's video, please remember to like and subscribe as it really helps me grow this YouTube channel and means I can keep showing you cool basses like this. Right, let's get back to it. So short scale basses in recent years have definitely taken on a bit of a resurgence with prominent figures such as Justin Meldal-Johnson with his signature JMJ Fender Mustang really leading the charge with that. Brands like Wilcox here in the UK have also released the Malarkey short scale bass to critical acclaim, and brands like Vincent guitars have also been entering the marketplace with basses such as the Pony. Now, the history of the short scale bass can go back all the way to the 1930s, but the first mass-produced short scale bass was the Gibson EB2-D in 1953. Following on for this trend, most of Gibson's basses have been around 30.25 inch scale length. Obviously, we have had some outliers with some longer scales, but typically we tend to find Gibson actually remain within that kind of shorter scale length. In 1961, Fender released their third bass design in the form of the Bass 6, and this was their first foray into a short scale bass to compete with Dan Electro's baritone model. And then by 1966, we see Fender had introduced a Mustang model as well. Now, short scales have a ton of benefits, and playing them definitely gives you a bit of a different flavor in terms of what you're going to come to expect from both the sound and the feel of playing the instrument. But that's not to say all short scales are made equal. This Vincent Pony, for example, has the bridge really far back on the body, which means that the reach to the first position actually feels really short. And this is one of the things that people say a lot of the time about Mustang and Fender style short scale basses, is that they feel really small. And by the time you're kind of at the 12th fret, they kind of feel like you're almost like soloing on a guitar. Your kind of hand is really towards the dusty end of the neck at this point. And that particular reach can take a little bit of getting used to. Whereas if we take a look at this 1964 Gibson EB2-D, for example, the bridge is actually a lot further forward. So looking where the first position on this, it feels a lot more like a 34-inch scale bass. So there's definitely some variance there. Now, the first benefit we're going to talk about today with short scales is the tone. Short scale basses, as the name suggests, are typically shorter than the normal 34-inch standard scale basses we come to expect from things like Fender Precisions, Fender Jazz basses, etc. And with that shorter scale length, it actually has a fundamental difference to the tone. Because of that short scale, you get less string tension, and because of that, you get less harmonic overtones, which means that you actually get a stronger fundamental, which is why a lot of the time people say short scale basses actually sound a bit bassier. They've got a lot more kind of low and low mid information and tend to have less treble information kind of like blending into the signal, which means that actually from a fundamental note point of view, you get a lot more low end. Combining that with a quicker note decay, and you get this really kind of like dubby, tubby character, which is really nice, especially with a set of flats. You get this really great kind of old school tone, which you hear scattered across recordings from kind of the 50s and 60s. Now, the second thing we're going to talk about today is the playability. Again, going back to the slightly less tension on the strings, it's a lot more forgiving on the right hand. You're not having to pluck as hard with your fingers, and simultaneously with the left hand, it's actually less of a stretch to fret the instrument, meaning that you can do a much further span than you could on a 34-inch scale, for example, and generally they're just a bit less fatiguing on the left hand. Because of this, I actually use short scales quite a lot of the time if I'm having to learn a lot of songs back to back, because it speeds up my learning process, not having to fight the instrument as much. It's easier on my hands, so I can kind of get the fingerings down a little bit quicker, and then I usually move those over to a longer scale instrument as necessary. third benefit of a short scale bass is the weight. Goes without saying that most short scales have a smaller body and a smaller neck. What this means is that you get less body weight, and it means that they can be a lot comfier if you're doing long gigs or you're going to be sat down for extended periods of time where the instrument's going to be on your knee. Because of this, it can actually mean that your gigging and your playing can just be a bit more enjoyable. You're less likely to get fatigued, and honestly, it just makes you feel a bit fresher after a long session when you're playing something which isn't weighing you down throughout a set. I'm going to talk about is short scales for beginners or guitar players looking to pick up a bass. Because the bodies are smaller and because you've got less neck to manage, short scales typically are favoured by guitar players who might be looking to pick up a bass as a recording tool and simultaneously as a student instrument. Fender's Music Master and the Mustang were kind of billed as student guitars because they were deemed to be easier to play, and that is definitely the case. With a 4-inch reduction in scale, it does mean that they are much easier to navigate for people who are trying to find their feet on the instrument, and it just helps that learning process. You're not having to fight the instrument as much, and it just means that if you are a guitar player looking for a studio tool, or you are a smaller handed player or a child looking to get into the instrument, it just helps navigate that journey and make it a little bit easier without having to fight the full length of a 34-inch scale bass. Obviously, for those of you with small hands, a 34-inch scale can be a very big stretch when you're looking to do kind of wider spans with your fretting, and it can just increase hand fatigue, whereas you tend not to find that with shorter scale basses. Finally, number 5, short scale basses definitely make you play differently. For me, a short scale bass is the sound of the 60s. It's really dubby, warm, round sound, and it definitely makes me play differently than if I was playing a jazz bass, for example. Because they have quicker decay, you tend to play them a little bit more melodically because you're trying to keep the instrument singing. And a perfect example of this is Paul McCartney on the short scale Hofner violin bass. Because of that bass's hollow body nature and its very quick plunky decay, Paul always plays super melodically to make the notes ring out throughout the rest of the music. And you definitely find this with short scale instruments. They kind of lend themselves to kind of like more melodic playing. I really like to play them with a pick, palm muted, because you get this really round, kind of tubby sound, and they sound great with drive as well because you're getting this fundamental, so they don't sound brittle like sometimes you might find with a jazz bass, for example, where they're quite trebly on the top end. Often you avoid that with a short scale, and so you get this really like meaty low, mid and bottom end drive sound, which just sounds great in kind of like rock and blues contexts. Now, in recent years, short scale basses have kind of elevated themselves from this student bass ideology, and prominent players are now reaping the benefits and realizing just how good they sound. Players like Mikey Way and JMJ with their signature Mustangs, and players like Tina Weymouth have really helped cement this in the kind of like rockier and poppier landscapes, whilst players like Matt Garrison have also brought short scale basses into the kind of jazz and jazz fusion area. In fact, my Vorin Saku's signature 5-string bass, the MP Shortie 5, was a short scale 5-string with a low B, and I'd also sometimes restring it for a high C, and that was a glorious bass with tons of bottom end, sounded amazing, and it played great as well. So there we have it, a quick overview of short scale basses and why I think every player needs one. So there we have it, a quick overview of short scale basses. Let me know in the comments, do you love short scales? Do you hate them? Do you think they're pointless? Do you think they're amazing? Let me know what you think. For me personally, I think they're a great thing to have on the rack. I think sometimes it just helps to have something which inspires you in a different way and certainly makes you play in a different way compared to, say, a P bass or a jazz bass or a 5-string or any of these things. As always, thank you so much for watching. I've been Matt Parker. Please remember to like and subscribe as it really helps me grow this YouTube channel. And until next time, I'll see you soon.